somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, federal agents were already watching. Not from shore, not from a patrol vessel, from the sky. A fixed-wing surveillance aircraft cruised silently above open water somewhere off the coast of Melbourne, Florida. The agents aboard had been tracking a sailboat moving steadily northward for hours. They knew exactly where it came from. They knew exactly where it was headed. And they knew, with absolute certainty, that the man whose name was on that boat was not on it. The boat was called the Soulmate. Sit with that name for a moment. The Soulmate. It belonged to a woman named Lynette Hooker, 55 years old, from Michigan, a woman who loved the open water, who documented her life at sea with a 360-degree camera, who worked out constantly, who was adventurous and crafty and deeply, genuinely alive. A woman who had sewn the canvas fittings on that very boat with her own hands. A woman whose daughter described her as someone who was always a text away. She had been missing since the night of April 4th, 2026, near Elbow Cay, Hopetown, in the Abaco Islands of the Bahamas. Her husband, Brian Hooker, 58, told authorities she fell from their 8-foot dinghy in rough conditions as the two of them made their way back to the Soulmate that night. He said she was holding the engine key when she went overboard. He said the currents carried her away. He said he lost sight of her in the dark. That was his story. Federal investigators opened a criminal investigation. Not an accident inquiry, not a recovery operation, a criminal investigation. And when the Soulmate finally left the Bahamas, agents were ready. Between May 8th and 10th, 2026, the U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service executed a covert surveillance and interdiction operation, seizing the Soulmate approximately 40 nautical miles off Melbourne, Florida. By May 12th, crime scene tapes surrounded its hull at U.S. Coast Guard Station, Fort Pierce, federal agents moving in and out, evidence bags in hand. A woman who loved this boat is missing. The man who said he loved her is in Michigan, and the boat named Soulmate is now a federal crime scene. This is where this case stands right now, and before we get into every single development, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching this from. Because this story is reaching people everywhere, and we want to hear from you. The Soulmate left Marsh Harbor, Bahamas on May 8, 2026. It was heading north, toward the United States, toward Florida, and it had no idea it was already being watched. Somewhere above the Atlantic, a fixed-wing surveillance aircraft from Air Station Miami held its position in the sky. Below it, the Soulmate moved steadily through open water. The agents tracking it from above already knew its heading. They already knew who was not on board, and they had already decided, long before that boat crossed into American waters, exactly what was going to happen next. They waited. On May 9th, with the Soulmate approximately 40 nautical miles off the coast of Melbourne, Florida, CGIS special agents moved in. Surface units from Sector Miami closed the distance. The boarding was swift. Federal agents stepped onto the deck of the Soulmate, the boat Lynette Hooker had loved, the boat she had sewn the fittings for, the boat she called home, and took control of it. Then the engine failed. With no power to move under its own weight, the Coast Guard cutter Winslow Greaser established a tow line and pulled the Soulmate through open water toward the Florida coastline. At Fort Pierce Inlet, a crew from Coast Guard Station Fort Pierce took over and brought it the rest of the way in. The Soulmate arrived at Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station on May 11th, 2026. Brian Hooker, 58, the man whose name was on that boat, was in Michigan. He sent a hired captain to bring it back. He did not come himself. Now, here is the part that matters most. Federal agencies do not coordinate aircraft, deploy multi-unit surface teams, and execute an open water interdiction for a vessel they could simply contact and request. They mount an operation like this for one reason only, and because they cannot risk what might happen to whatever is on that boat before they reach it. So the question every investigator is now sitting with is this: what did they find when they stepped aboard? The U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service released an official public statement about the seizure of the Soulmate. 4 sentences, that is all they gave. And in those 4 sentences, if you know how to read them, they told you everything. The statement opens by describing the seizure as part of an ongoing criminal investigation into the disappearance of Lynette Hooker. Not a missing persons inquiry, not a recovery operation, not an accident review, a criminal investigation. Those 2 words, chosen by sworn federal law enforcement officers with full arrest powers under United States law, do not appear in an official government document by accident. They appear because they are the precise and deliberate truth of what this investigation has become. The statement then confirms the seizure was coordinated across CGIS, surface units from Sector Miami, and aviation assets from Air Station Miami. Think about what that coordination represents. Two separate operational divisions, aircraft and vessels, moving together on a single target. That is not the response to an unexplained disappearance at sea, and then, right there in the third sentence, the federal government goes quiet. Due to the ongoing nature of the investigation, no additional details are being released at this time. Picture Lynette Hooker, a woman who documented her whole life at sea, who never went a day without her camera or her phone, reduced to 4 government sentences and a wall of silence. That silence is not nothing. In federal investigations, silence of this kind means the case is too active, too sensitive, and too close to something significant to risk saying a word more than necessary. The statement ends with a direct public appeal. Anyone with information about Lynette Hooker's disappearance is asked to contact CGIS, and tips can be submitted anonymously. Federal agents with the authority to carry firearms, execute warrants, and make arrests are asking the public for help, which means somewhere out there, someone knows something, and they haven't said a word. May 12, 2026, Fort Pierce, Florida. A 46-foot sailboat sits docked at U.S. Coast Guard Station Fort Pierce, still and quiet in the Florida heat. Crime scene tape runs across its hull, and the people moving on and off that boat are wearing black shirts with yellow lettering, tan pants, and blue gloves. They carry things off in evidence bags, they go below deck, and they stay there for hours. A reporter standing on the dock asked Coast Guard Lieutenant Nicolina Converso directly what was happening on that boat. Her answer was 4 words. "We can't comment on pending investigations." 4 words from a uniformed federal officer standing 20 feet from a taped-off sailboat is not a brush-off. It is confirmation that whatever is happening on that vessel is too significant to discuss in public. The agents working below deck are not simply looking around. Every surface is being documented, every compartment examined, every item still aboard accounted for. They are looking for anything that places a specific version of events on this boat, or quietly dismantles one. Start with the ignition key. Brian Hooker told Bahamian authorities that Lynette was holding the engine's safety lanyard, the key, when she went overboard. When she fell, the engine cut out. That is why, he said, he had to paddle for hours to reach shore. If that key is found anywhere aboard the Soulmate, Brian Hooker's account of that night breaks apart at its foundation. Then there are the phones. Brian told friends that his phone was on him during the incident, but it did not work because it could only connect via Wi-Fi. Friends who knew the couple found that detail hard to square with what they knew. The Hookers always had their phones with them. They used them constantly. They filmed their life at sea with them. Federal Forensic Processing pulls location data, call records, and connectivity logs from every device aboard. It does not rely on anyone's explanation of whether a phone worked or did not. The Soulmate is 46 feet long. Lynette Hooker lived every inch of it. Right now, federal agents are inside it, and whatever they're finding, they are not saying a word. Blaine Stevenson has known Brian Hooker for years. He is not an investigator. He is not a prosecutor. He is a friend, a member of the same sailing community, someone who first met the Hookers while anchored near them in Bradenton, Florida in late 2023. Someone who had sailed with them, someone who, when Lynette went missing on the night of April 4th, reached out, the way friends do. 3 days later, on April 7th, 2026, Stevenson spoke to Brian directly by phone. That call ran for nearly 40 minutes. Stevenson recorded it without Brian's knowledge, initially to capture the locations Brian mentioned, since Stevenson didn't know that stretch of the Bahamas well. He later shared it with investigators and released it publicly. On that call, Brian described the night in detail. He described it as a cascade of failures. He said he would never forgive himself. When Brian mentioned that police had asked how long he planned to stay in the Bahamas, he said this: "Until I get my wife back. That's my goal. I cancelled everything we were going back home for, and I'm going to renew my visa and stay here." Now hold that against what Stevenson witnessed on the ground. April 5th, 2026, the morning after Lynette vanished. Search and rescue teams took Brian out for 3 to 4 hours. When they were done, they brought him back to the Soulmate. He stayed there, not for an hour, not for an afternoon, for nearly 24 hours. He sat on that boat while his wife was still missing. Stevenson laid it out precisely on the record. So the incident happened Saturday at 7:30 p.m. He came ashore at 4 a.m. The search and rescue took him out for 3 or 4 hours and brought him back to his boat. He sat on his boat for almost 24 hours until search and rescue brought him his dinghy back. Then on April 6th, Brian left the Soulmate entirely. He checked into the Conch Inn in Marsh Harbour, Great Abaco Island, a hotel. While the search for Lynette was still active, he stayed there until Bahamian authorities came for him on April 8th. Stevenson did not hold back. At no point did he really look at the situation and give anybody any more details than he had at the beginning, when supposedly he was in shock. And then, the two questions that have defined public reaction to this case from the moment Stevenson spoke them. Even if he accepts the fact that his wife is gone, does he not want closure? Does he not want redemption? Brian said his goal was to stay until he found Lynette. What he actually did, and how fast he did it, is what this investigation is now built around. April 13th, 2026. Brian Hooker walked out of the Central Police Station in Freeport, Grand Bahama Island, a free man. 5 days of questioning, no charges filed. The following morning, April 14th, he returned to that same station. Not to answer more questions, to collect his wedding ring and watch, both held during his detention. The ring did not fit where it belonged anymore. He wore it on his pinky finger. Then he sat for interviews. My only focus is to go back to the boat and then hire or beg people to help me go find some areas to search, he said. His sole purpose, finding Lynette, no matter how likely or unlikely that is. Those are his words. On the record. April 14th, 2026. That same afternoon, Brian Hooker boarded a plane at Grand Bahama Freeport Airport. He was photographed doing it. Attorney Terrell Butler was at his side. He was not heading to Elbow Cay. He was not heading toward the search area. He flew to Nassau, and from Nassau out of the Bahamas entirely. A source confirmed he landed in Atlanta, Georgia the following day. His attorney said he was heading to Michigan to be with his terminally ill mother. Atlanta is not Michigan. His Bahamian attorney Terrell Butler released a statement. Brian had received urgent word of his mother's grave illness and had traveled to the United States to be at her bedside. His Michigan-based attorney Crystal Marie Hauser then addressed the public directly. She asked for the benefit of the doubt. When asked whether Brian planned to return to the Bahamas to help with the search, Hauser chose her words carefully. I imagine that is where his heart is, but I can't speak on whether or not that's what he would be doing. His heart, not his actions, not his plans, not his timeline. His heart. Brian Hooker collected his wedding ring on the morning of April 14th. He declared finding Lynette his sole purpose. He boarded a plane that afternoon. He has not been publicly seen in the Bahamas since. Lynette Hooker is still missing, and somewhere in Michigan, Brian Hooker is waiting in silence while federal agents work through every inch of the boat he left behind. Carly Aylesworth is 28 years old. Brian Hooker has been in her life since she was 4. He was not a stranger who entered the picture late. He was, by every practical measure, the man who helped raise her. She knows how he moves through a room. She knows both versions of him. And from the moment he called her on the evening of April 5th, 2026, something felt wrong. He called between 8 o'clock and 8:30 that Sunday evening. His tone was flat, matter of fact. Hey, your mum is missing. We don't know where she is. She's been missing since last night, but we're going to come up there soon to see you. Then he kept talking. Then he ended the call, just like that. Sit with the timing for a moment. Lynette had been missing since Saturday evening, April 4th. Brian did not call her daughter until Sunday evening. That is a full day before Carly even knew her mother was gone. Carly described the call as a bomb being dropped on her. How do you just lose my mum? The questions that followed were not grief. They were the specific, pointed questions of someone who already knew something was off. Why wouldn't he drop anchor and look for her? Why did he paddle the other way? Those two questions are still unanswered. Let them sit there for a moment, because they matter. Carly then told investigators and the public what her mother had previously confided, that the marriage had at times become violent, that Brian had threatened to throw Lynette overboard during a fight in 2024. Brian Hooker categorically denied every allegation Carly made. His attorney stated her claims were without evidence. Those denials are on the record. But Carly was not finished. She flew to the Bahamas herself. She visited the Soulmate, the boat her mother had lived on, and described sitting beside it and talking to Lynette as though she was still there. She retraced the dinghy route her mother and Brian took from Hopetown on the night of April 4th. She raised a detail that investigators have also noted. Lynette never drove the dinghy. It was always Brian. So the fact that Lynette allegedly had the ignition key when she went overboard sat uneasily with everyone who knew the couple. Then there was what the locals told her. Every person Carly spoke to in Hopetown and Elbow Cay, independently and without coordination, said the same thing. The water near Aunt Pat's Bay where Lynette went missing is less than 10 feet deep at high tide. In some areas a person could simply stand. The swept away by currents account is not consistent with what people who know those waters have spent their lives observing. Lynette's mother, Darlene Hamlet, put it plainly. We have many unanswered questions. We are still holding on for a positive outcome to this tragedy. And on Mother's Day, May 2026, Carly posted a message that reached far beyond this investigation. It's the first Mother's Day without my mum. It's pretty hard right now to know that she's not a text away anymore. She is not waiting passively. She is pushing, and what she is pushing toward, and what investigators are building toward, is the subject of the next chapter. On the night of April 4th, 2026, the Soulmate was not the only boat anchored in Aunt Pat's Bay. Someone else was there. Before we get to who that someone might be, it helps to understand what Aunt Pat's Bay actually is. It is a compact, sheltered anchorage in the lee of Elbow Cay, a small, protected pocket of water where sailors stop when the anchorage at nearby Tahiti Beach gets too crowded. The depth runs between 6 and 10 feet. Boats anchor close to each other there by necessity. It is not open ocean. It is not a vast stretch of water where vessels pass in the dark without awareness of each other. When you anchor in Aunt Pat's Bay, you know who is around you, which is why what happened next matters so much. A full month after Lynette disappeared, on May 5th, 2026, federal investigators made a public appeal. CGIS posted photographs of a sailboat on social media alongside the US Embassy in Nassau, both asking for the same thing. Who owns that vessel? Who was aboard it on the night of April 4th? The Coast Guard memo obtained independently was precise. The owners/occupants of the sailing vessel may have information relevant to the CGIS investigation. Think about what that means. Federal investigators, a month into a criminal case, are publicly confirming that someone was anchored close enough to the Soulmate in that small protected bay to have seen or heard something on the night Lynette vanished. They have images of that vessel. They know it was there, and they cannot find who was on it. Or, and this is the possibility that carries more weight, they have found that person. And whatever that person told investigators is now sealed inside an active federal criminal case. No public statement has indicated the owner of that vessel is suspected of any wrongdoing. They are a potential witness and nothing more. But someone anchored in 6 to 10 feet of water in a sheltered bay, close enough that another boat's movements would be impossible to miss, may hold the one account that puts Brian Hooker's version of that night to the test. That person has not come forward publicly, and Aunt Pat's Bay is still keeping its secrets. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She was from Michigan. She had spent more than a decade building a life on the water with Brian, documenting their adventures on social media under the name The Sailing Hookers. The About section of their sailboat social media page, written in her voice, described herself in 5 words. Photographer/sailor, living my best life. That was how she saw herself, not as a wife, not as a case, as someone living her best life, and she meant it. In video after video, she appears in motion, wind in her hair, sun on her shoulders, laughter carried off before it fully lands. She snorkeled alongside manatees and traced the slow glide of sea turtles through clear Bahamian water. She cooked aboard using a solar oven, cinnamon rolls, muffins, pizza. She filmed it all, not for an audience, just as a record of how they were living. The ocean was not a backdrop for Lynette. She called it her happy place. She gave up everything to be on it. In early 2024, during a brief and painful separation from Brian, she wrote to her friend and fellow sailor Marnie Stevenson. The words revealed the full weight of what she had walked away from to be on that boat. I quit my awesome career, sold my house and gave away everything I owned to cruise. She went further. It was real bad. I can't be out there with him. She left Brian at that point and went to stay with her mother in Florida. She told Marnie the marriage was finished. I guess it was too much closeness. We decided to call it quits. I'm not going back. A month later, in late February 2024, Marnie messaged to check in. Looks like things are on the up and up, Lynette replied with heart emojis and a thumbs up. She went back. That single fact, and more than anything else in this chapter, captures the full, complicated humanity of Lynette Hooker. People return to lives they know are difficult for reasons that are real and layered and not reducible to any simple explanation. She went back. She loved that boat. She kept filming. She kept living. On March 29, 2026, just 6 days before she vanished, she posted from Marsh Harbour, darkened skies, choppy water, the horizon blurred by rain. She wrote beneath it, "The Sea of Abaco is very entertaining, and they say we'll have some fun if it stops raining." That was the last thing she shared publicly. Lynette Hooker deserves to be found, she deserves answers, and she deserves to be remembered as exactly who she was, a photographer, a sailor, a woman who loved the sea, not simply as a case the sea swallowed up. The investigation is still running, and what it finds may be the only way her family ever gets to stop waiting. As of May 2026, Lynette Hooker remains missing. Brian Hooker remains uncharged, represented by Terrell Butler in the Bahamas and Crystal Marie Hauser in Michigan, currently silent, and his whereabouts unconfirmed. The Royal Bahamas Police Force investigation is still open. Their Department of Public Prosecutions recommended no charges be filed at this time. Note those last 3 words, at this time. And the CGIS federal criminal investigation is active, the Soulmate in federal custody at Fort Pierce. Forensic processing ongoing, witness interviews ongoing, and the mystery vessel from Aunt Pat's Bay still publicly unresolved. That is where the case stands. Now, here is where the case is going. Kenneth Engerand is an adjunct professor of maritime law at the University of Houston Law Center. He knows this area of federal law with precision, and on May 14, 2026, he said this on the record. They can't file charges without substantial evidence, but that's why they're on the boat. They're looking for evidence. And then the line that matters most. That's a much more difficult process without the body, but it's not impossible to do. Federal charges in this case, without ever finding Lynette Hooker, are not only possible, they are the direction the investigation is legally built to travel. There is a detail that underpins all of it. The Soulmate is an American-flagged vessel. Under federal maritime law, CGIS needed no warrant to board and search it. Everything agents found aboard, every evidence bag carried off that dock in Fort Pierce, is legally clean. The investigation has been airtight from the moment it began. And Engerand confirmed who CGIS is working with to build that case, the U.S. Attorney in Florida. This is no longer just a federal investigation. It is a federal prosecution in construction. A former federal special agent with direct experience in cases of this kind said it plainly. Without her body, I still think, based on the totality, there's a possibility that they could charge. This case is not closing. It is building. Somewhere inside a laboratory, inside sealed evidence bags pulled from the hull of a 46-foot sailboat, sits whatever those federal agents found when they went below deck at Fort Pierce. That evidence is the one thing that could give this family everything they have been waiting for since the night of April 4th, 2026. The only question still unanswered is whether it is enough. if you have any information about the events of that night near Elbow Cay and Hopetown, or about the identity of the unidentified vessel moored in Aunt Pat's Bay. Contact CGIS through the CGIS tips line. Tips can be submitted anonymously. Lynette Hooker deserves answers, and so does everyone still waiting for them.